Mr. Chu here with Trey Arithmetic. We're going to talk about the Pythagorean Theorem today. This is part one, just an introduction to the Pythagorean Theorem. So make sure that if you like using these videos to help you with your arithmetic issues, make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel. It's at Mr.KeithEChew. So it's YouTube at Mr.KeithEChew. My TikTok and Instagram are Mr. KeithEChew. Make sure you like this video. We'll go ahead and start talking about the Pythagorean Theorem. Now the Pythagorean Theorem is a very important theorem in both arithmetic and algebra and geometry. It is required that you have a right triangle. So the right triangle is designated with this little square in one of the corners. And then after you have that little square, you have to identify the side opposite that right angle as the hypotenuse. This would be like a vocab. And then these two other sides that end up forming the right angle are called legs. Now, in the right triangle, it has a formula. It's very important to remember. And the formula is written a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Now, you notice I'm using lowercase variables. And the two legs are always called a and b, and it doesn't matter which one's a and which is b. And the hypotenuse is always called C. So that's the important basic parts of the introduction of the right triangle. So we can use arithmetic and basic algebra to find a missing length in the right triangle if you're given the other two sides. So let's go ahead and see if we can do a couple of examples here. All right, so in example one, I have a right triangle. Remember that right triangle is designated with that little square in the triangle that's 90 degrees, and the angle that's 90 degrees in the triangle. And the side opposite, it will always be C. And then these two sides, it doesn't matter which is which. I'm just going to call this one A and this one B. So if I'm given the length of this side A is 6 inches and the length of side B is 8 inches, I can solve C by just substituting into my Pythagorean theorem. So let's write it down. And now let's substitute. And remember, in my other videos, I always do this very clearly. Wherever A is, I'm going to put parentheses, and I'm going to substitute that value and square it. And wherever B is, I'm going to substitute that value, put it in parentheses, and square it. All right, so 6 inches squared means 6 times 6, which is 36, and then inches squared would be my unit of measure, and then 8 squared is 64, and then the inches squared is my unit. So now I'm going to add these up, and I get 100, and there's a square up here, I forgot. Inches squared equals C squared. So now this is a very important pre-algebra concept, which would be considered arithmetic as well. In order to undo a square, we take the square root. And the square root of 100 means what two numbers multiplied by themselves gives me 100. And in this case, it happens to be 10. And the square root of inches squared is inches, which gives me my unit of measure. So I can say this equals 10 inches here. And we have a 6, 8, 10 right triangle. All right, so now let's go to example 2. And in example 2, I want to find the missing b. So remember, we have to be able to identify. We know it's a right triangle. We know this is a hypotenuse. So we know this is C. If this one's B, this one has to be A. So now I just substitute. Substitute into what? Into my Pythagorean theorem. So my A is 5. I don't have any units here. I'm going to square that. Plus my B, I don't know. So I just write that as B squared. But my C, I do know. I square 5, which is 25. 5 times 5 is 25. 13 squared is 169. Now I have to solve this using a two-step equation. This is basic algebra, considered pre-algebra, which is why we include it in our arithmetic curriculum here. I subtract 25 from both sides, subtracting the same thing from both sides using the subtraction property of equality. This cancels out here, and I have b squared equals 144. So now, what did we do here? We took the square root of both sides, and the square root of 144 gives me b equals 12. So I know that this is 12 up here. These are two basic examples of how you find a missing length in a right triangle using the Pythagorean theorem. All right, so now, do the problems ever get harder? Of course they do. Everything always has a way of getting harder. So let's go to an example 3. And in example 3, I have my right angle here. Across from that right angle, I have a 17, and we know that's going to be my C. And then I have B equaling 15, and I know that I can find A over here by using the Pythagorean theorem. Okay? So, when I do that now, I substitute. I don't have anything for A. For the B, I have 15. I'm going to square that. For my C, I have 17. I'm going to square that. 15 squared is 225. I just know that from my head. 17 squared, well, if you don't know that in your head, just multiply it out. 7 times 7 is 49. Carry the 4. 7 times 1 is 7, plus 4 is 11. Hold my place value. 7, 1, 289. Now I solve by subtracting 225 from both sides. This crosses out. I have a squared equals 64. Then what do? Our last step, you take the square root of both sides. So taking the square root of both sides will give me A equals 8. Okay, so now I want you to try a couple on your own. Try these. Try that one, and then try this one. Try those, and then we'll see how that goes. I'll have a link up here with their solutions and a link down here to a playlist. I'm Mr. Keith E. Chu, and I want to help you learn.